Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats.
You know, it's these truly poignant stories of working class men and women that, no matter when it got made, they're just even more and more relevant than they ever have been. And, if you're within the sound of my voice, that must mean you're in the seats with once more. As always, my name is Dave Voigt, and I'm the host of this podcast, where we sit down with a wide-ranging variety of industry professionals and we pick their brain about current projects, state of the industry, how they got started, and so very much more in a light and in a conversational fashion. And if you like how we do things around here, I'm going to go out on a limb and assume that you do, because let's face it, you're listening right now. Subscribe, hit that subscribe button, give us the old 5-star rating on your podcast platform of choice. We're pretty much everywhere. We're over at Apple, Amazon, Spotify, Google, and plus we archive every single one of our episodes over at our In the Seats YouTube channel. So if you can give us a like and subscribe there as well, we would absolutely appreciate it. Also, do not hesitate to check us out on social media. We're on the Facebook, we're on the Twitter, we're on the Instagram, and we're on the TikTok, and we're on the Letterboxd for all sorts of fun updates. And finally, and I do dare say most importantly, please pay us a visit over at intheseats.ca for all the latest and greatest from the world of film, television, basically the moving image at large. Because, if we love to write about it and talk about it and watch it, we love it when you come by and read about it and listen about it. So please pay us a visit. On this episode, we got a real good one. We're taking a little bit of a blast from the past, as it is with a film that has been freshly remastered and is available streaming on the OVID.TV streaming service, and it's called The Wobblies. It is a very significant and poignant documentary which investigates a nation torn apart by naked corporate greed and the red-hot rift between the industrial masters and the rabble-rousing workers in the field and the factory. This was made in the 70s, but dear God, it is still incredibly relevant today. It was restored by the Museum of Modern Art, and again, it is a film that just kind of demands to be seen. And we had the unique pleasure of talking with the iconic directors of this film, Mr. Stewart and Miss Deborah Shaffer, about sort of the story of the film and how everything got rolling and its relevance today, and so very much more. But like I said, if you don't already have it, I do recommend you go sign up for OVID.TV, the streaming service. It is a fantastic one, but first, check out our conversation with Stewart and Deborah about the Wobblies, because between you and me, it is a darn good one. But I mean, first and foremost, just to the both of you, thank you so much for the time. And I got to watch the movie last night for the first time, and I really enjoyed it. Wow. I guess my first question for both of you is walk me through the origin of wanting to tell this story on your end, because in doing my research and just, it seems like everything, it felt like the organization feels very cyclical. And when you made the film, it felt like it was definitely on sort of a bit of an uptick.
Well, actually, I would say the opposite. I think it's on an uptick now, but it was out. I think it was, my motivation was partly that when I first heard of the organization, somebody gave me a book about the Lawrence mass strike when I was in newsreel, the filmmaking group, which is where I first had met Stu. And I was just shocked that I'd never heard of this radical labor union. We'd heard about the history of the Communist Party in the US and many other movements. I had never heard of them. I'm not sure where Stu first heard of them, but what's really surprising about this revival is the film is almost more relevant now, again, than I think in that way things are definitely very cyclical. But Stu wrote a play. I'll let him talk about why he wrote the play, but Stu wrote a play about the IWW that was performed in New York in 1977, right, Stu?
I think that's right.
Put on at the Hudson Guild Theater. It was called The U.S. versus William D. Haywood et al. And I had remembered this book, and I remembered Stu from newsreel, and I saw an ad for the play, and I went because I wanted to see it. And there were some Wobblies there that night, and they were very old, and they were very enthusiastic, and they were very amazing. And I turned to Stu and I said, we have to do a film about these people now.
And that's it. I had read about the Wobblies also, didn't know anything about it, never heard about them, and came to write this play And Deborah came down and we did the film. And I think we both thought, well, this is an oral history. These people are in their late 80s and 90s. Let's find everyone, do a search, get everyone down on film as fast as we can, and, make a movie around this, try to tell the whole story with what we have in this oral history. And I think for both Deborah and I now, I think it's become more than, people saw it back in 79 as a slice of history. They love these people, love the story. But now I think when Deborah's gone out a lot more than I have, but the reaction is, wow, this is what we're dealing with now. We're dealing with unions, Amazon, Starbucks. Then you even, everyone is being forced and squeezed. And the concentration of capital now and the concentration of power is very similar to the late 19th century, and the Wobblies were formed in 1905. And it's got more relevance now than I think when we did it.
Well, yeah, also so this is one thing it came to me as we were starting this revival. And I mean, I think when we did the film, something like almost 20% of American workers were in a labor union, and now we're down to 6%. So we're in a very different time frame. And there was another point I wanted to make that went out of my head. It'll come back to me. It'll come back, I hope.
No worries. But I mean, I've got to ask, because I mean, in watching it, I was struck by, I mean, like you mentioned, sort of the enthusiasm of everyone to talk. Was it hard to get people to participate, or was everyone pretty much on board the minute you sort of gave them the idea?
Well, it's funny, they were, we searched people out. I don't even remember exactly how we found all of them. But I mean, I remember one of the first people we interviewed, we drove up to Buffalo to interview these people. And we got there and they said, I don't remember how we found them. And we got there and they said, are you sure you want to talk to, you want to hear this? Nobody's talked to us about this stuff in 80 years, 50 years, whatever it was. Nobody had ever asked them about it. And they were sort of initially, I think, kind of surprised that we showed up and wanted to hear their stories.
Absolutely.
But then in most cases, once we got started, I mean, they just, they were thrilled to talk and to sing and to remember and to reminisce. I mean, obviously, they never lost their fighting spirit, their commitment, their, enthusiasm, their belief in what they were doing. Some of them were still, I mean, Jack Miller and his wife were organizing, senior citizens in Seattle when we filmed them, and they hadn't lost their ideals. I mean, that was one of the most inspiring things I would say about the people. I think one point I'd wanted to make was, because Stu said, it was an oral history. We didn't have any choice, because we had no access to the leadership of the IWW. The leadership was long gone. They had all died much younger, and for one reason and another, repression and ill health and all kinds of things. So I just want to point out, I know, David, if you just watched the film, I don't know if you thought about it, but the whole notion of using actors to read the words of the leadership, I think we hit upon that because of Stu's play. We were like, oh, we could, we used like an idea from Stu's play to open and to close the film. But that wasn't being done in documentaries in 1979. Documentaries were very much more like they were either very much entirely cinema verite, kind of fly on the wall, the Leacock Maisels, Pennebaker kind of film, or they were heavily narrated like educational films. And I think we were there. I mean, I like to point out that this, we did this 10 years before the Civil War came out. Because, and ideas leapfrog over each other. We all keep learning from each other's work and absorb new ideas. But the tremendous use of photos, archives, artifacts, artwork, cartoons, and the voiceovers, I think was was radical from a filmmaking point of view at the time. It doesn't seem so now. It's perfectly, everybody does it. So what's the big deal? But in 1979, it was not ubiquitous.
No, but I mean, I'm glad you brought that up, Deborah, because I mean, you're right. I think that kind of speaks to the freedom of the documentary form, because I mean, even like you said, you didn't necessarily have access to leadership. You're quite literally, like you said, this is an oral history. You're taking these people at their word, and you're sort of recounting these stories. Like, for you guys, how important was it to sort of, I mean, I'm trying to find the right word here, because I mean, obviously you want to be truthful to the story and truthful to things that happen, but at the same time, it did feel like there is a little bit of flair there as well, like you said, at least from a style standpoint, and sort of allowing not just the use of narration, but also your subject stories as well, to sort of give it that much extra color as we're sort of seeing it all unfold.
Well, it's filmmaking. We're making a movie. I mean,
Right.
movies are meant fundamentally still to entertain. I mean, in my book, they have a lot of other purposes too, but it's not, you know, sometimes we were criticized for not including more sort of maybe facts or more analysis. And, you know, as far as I'm concerned, the best result of a film like this would be somebody would go read about the IWW. I don't think a film should, you know, I think of a film's primary purpose is to get people emotionally involved and to entertain them. Even documentaries, even the most serious documentaries need that. They need to get to your heart, you know?
I think Deborah's right. And I think, given the kind of people we had, they just burst out in song. I mean, there was nothing, they were bursting out, period, and talking about these events. But when we checked the facts of time, we had a National Endowment for the Humanities panel of experts who were surprised we even found 5 or 6 of the people. They didn't know anything about them. And they also, everything was fact checked. I mean, everything they said, and they had amazing memories of day-to-day stuff, of people, of events. So although they're talking, passionately, they're also telling a story that's absolutely real and factual, because we have these people checking, every step of the way, the people who are the scholars in the area,
There's an interesting story, David, about finding the people, because also I'd like to remind people when I'm talking about the film that we didn't have the internet.
Of course. Well, yeah.
We didn't have cell phones. We didn't have like all these modern means of communication that when Stu and I had to submit various versions of the proposal to different places, we had to type it out each time with carbon paper or different, it's like there was no cut and paste except physics. I mean, it's crazy when you think back. So we put ads in like, in the New York Review of Books and in the Nation and in the San Francisco newspaper and in labor magazines. We put little almost like personal ads, and our biggest, Stu, why don't you tell him about finding James Fair? Because that was one of our
the biggest, the biggest coup Deborah and I had was we actually handed out flyers on the Philadelphia docks in Philadelphia, looking for anyone who was part of the maritime. I don't remember the union.
I don't remember the exact initial. Yeah.
And believe it or not, we got James Fair, who was 85, maybe he's older than that. Black member, a proud member of the union, and I mean, he couldn't believe we even found him. And he's incredible if you remember the show in terms of, because the Wobblies were the first union. I mean, not the first union, but first major union that was letting in women, blacks, who went to leadership positions and were also members. It's one of the things that's really important. The AFL didn't let in any of these people. They were around, and the Wobblies saw the necessity of organizing everyone, because the Western Federation of Miners, which Big Bill Hayward was the head of, they had range wars out there, but the companies try to divide the workers between Mexicans and white, and they learned that lesson. They brought it to the Wobblies in 1905, so everyone was let in, as a member. And a lot of those people rose to leadership positions. Elizabeth Gurley Flynn, of course.
For sure.
And yeah. And I don't know if we answered.
No, you did. No, for sure. But I mean, I'm curious, like, because I was fascinated by the use of song as well in the organization. And like, was that sort of a galvanizing tool in terms of getting everybody on board? Because I mean, we all understand unions and sort of the concept therein, but it's that use of song that seemingly took it to a different level.
Well, one thing that, I mean, I think it sort of became even more clear to me lately. I mean, they were often dealing with people who didn't speak English. There were a lot of immigrant workers. So in Lawrence, I think there were like 26, were publishing leaflets in 26 languages. Songs were one way that people could communicate with each other. You know, the lyrics, they could learn the lyrics and they could all sing together. And and also many people were not literate entirely in those days. So singing and communicating by music and song was a great way to both raise people's spirits and communicate with each other. And, you know, we didn't really do much in the film with Joe Hill. Now, I don't think we knew that we were going to do the one and only documentary on the IWW that was ever going to be made. And if I have any regret, it's that, because I don't think there really has been another one. We didn't include every single thing that we could have possibly included. But I sort of regret that Joe Hill isn't more featured and that Frank Little isn't more featured. But Joe Hill, who I think many people have heard of even today.
Oh, yeah.
Well, they all know the Joan Baez song, right? I dreamed I saw Joe Hill last night.
Course, yeah.
He was a member of the IWW. He was one of the major contributors to the IWW songbook. And everybody, when they joined, I think it's said in the film, they got their union card and they got their little red songbook. And I have it here somewhere. It's a little red songbook. It's on the shelf. I'm not showing pictures, but.
And Joe Hill was murdered, was killed in Utah.
Well, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Deborah, don't beat yourself up too bad. I mean, I don't think nobody has 40-year-old hindsight, so I wouldn't worry.
Well, and I wish other people had done films. I just assumed there would be more, you know.
No, I mean, I've got to ask, like, in the course of your research and talking to everyone, was there ever sort of a firm definition of why the Wobblies?
Oh, the name?
Yeah.
Unknown.
Really?
Unknown to this day. Yeah.
I mean, to me, that's almost more fascinating than sort of the birth of the organization itself.
There were a bunch of stories, you know, Chinese person couldn't pronounce W, he said wobble instead of W, and people used to call me I want whiskeys, and I don't know, but no, nobody really knows where wobbly. Nobody knows. One of those.
To me, that's wild. That is just completely wild, but I love it still. It gives it that much. It gives the story that gravitas in my mind. Now, I mean, I'm curious, as this revival has sort of been going on, because I mean, it's been 43 years since the film released. I mean, obviously, God knows how many before when you were working on it, doing research and getting everything together.
45 years since we started.
Wow. Okay. So how has sort of the reaction with the general public been as people are starting to rediscover this film?
Fantastic. I mean, this is totally unexpected to me. I mean, how this new preservation, we had done a film preservation in 2005. We applied for a grant and made a new film negative from our old negative to preserve it in film. And then the people who helped us do that, it was the Women's Film Preservation Fund of the New York Women in Film and Television, and they organized a screening in 2018 at Union Docks in Brooklyn, and Stu and I were both there. It was a cold, rainy February night. I think there were about 40 people there, not a huge audience, but we hadn't seen the film at least I hadn't seen the film in a really long time that night. And I think in 2018 we were all stunned by how relevant the film suddenly seemed, especially, you know, it was in the midst of the Trump administration and all this talk about immigrants and deportations and the kind of racist language. A. Mitchell Palmer stuff was so resonant with what we were hearing and what was in the papers that we all looked at each other after that screening. And it was like when we said we have to do this film, we said, we have to do something about this. We should re-release the film now. And then we started the idea of there was some talk, should we, do more titles on it? Should we put more information, put names on things? But we decided, no, you can't do that for an old film. You have to preserve it as it was. And And we worked with actually the Museum of Modern Art. We had donated our negatives to them, and we got in touch with them and said we were interested in looking at doing a digital preservation, and they said, "Oh, we'll do it," which was like, I mean, great, really, 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 really great. And that was right before 2018, that we were heading into the pandemic, so it really took a while to get this done and get it out. But it was a very lovely, I mean, it's a little film thing, but Do Art Labs actually did the digital restoration, and we had done we had processed our dailies at Do Art Labs in 1977, and we did our 2022, and lab is closed now. We were like one of the last projects to do the lab. So it was a nice little, for us, it was a very nice little closure.
No, I mean, I'm amazed because, I mean, obviously it's so important to restore film and have films like this saved. But I mean, even in watching it, like I was thinking if they had made this now or made something similar now, it almost feels like now it would have taken more of a political bent one way or the other. And your film, to me, at least tries to be somewhat apolitical. Like, was that important for you guys at the time to make it more about the worker and the union and sort of telling the story as opposed to trying to give it a bent politically one way or another?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, we wanted them to speak. You know, we thought what they had to say was what was important. We didn't need a narration to, to turn it one way or another. It was right there. And I think we lucked out with having Roger Baldwin do the narration. He was a founder of the ACLU, and the ACLU's work back then in 1917 or whenever they started, I think it was 17, was labor. That was the focus of the ACLU, and Roger Baldwin adds so much to narration from his own experience and to the trial and to what happened and to him trying to ride the rails. So I think between the people who are telling the story and Roger Baldwin being part of that, I mean, there's nothing really to add to anything that we felt.
But I think the political choice really was in the first instance. The political choice was the subject matter that we chose. And I know I used to talk with Julia Reichert about this. I assume you're familiar with her work. She just passed away very, very recently. And she had done, before we did this film, she had done Union Maids. And then I looked at, I think that was in the back of my mind when I decided to do the Wobblies. And Julie and I have talked about this. And then they did Seeing Red after the Wobblies. And I was talking about borrowing things. They borrowed the idea of having people sing from our film. And by the way, the movie Reds also borrowed from us, Warren Beatty. He borrowed The Witnesses. If you look at Reds again, I looked at it recently. It's a fabulous film. Actually.
I'm gonna have to put that in. My God, yeah, I think you're.
Oh yes, right. Look at it. But Roger Baldwin is in Reds, and so is Art Shields, both of whom are interviewed in our film. And I think that I don't know if Warren Beatty would say this, but I think the whole idea of having the living witnesses might have been sparked by films like The Wobblies and Seeing Reds, Julia and Jim's film. But they're a really interesting pair. So I think the politics were in the choice, and then we went. My attitude is always, I mean, there are different ways people make films, but there's no predetermined outcome. And I think I had thought, for instance, going into this film, that the Wobblies had destroyed themselves internally. We got interested in some of this history as being members of the New Left, which was kind of fallen apart right before, in some ways, after the war in Vietnam ended. And we were trying to understand what our antecedents had been. And I had thought that the Wobblies had probably destroyed themselves internally with the communists and the anarchists. And it turned, by the time I was done with the film, I realized that wasn't the case. They were destroyed by the repression that was brought down on them. And they didn't have a prayer of surviving the governmental, the arrests and the beatings and the jailings and the fines and their offices destroyed. And in fact, that is suddenly in the public discourse in a way that I'm astounded by. There's a new book out about the repression of the IWW. I don't remember the name of that one. I'm just reading Midnight's Children by Adam Hochschild, which starts with the repression of the Wobblies. It's suddenly all over the place because I think that's also very parallel to what's going on today, this kind of, anyway, that what I was going for was that, it was, you have to follow your nose. You have to follow what you're learning when you're doing the films. You have to follow what the people are telling you, and they decide what the film is. Not, I mean, yes, we are the filmmakers, but we learn from them.
No, I mean, I'm curious for both of you just to start putting a bow on this, because I mean, obviously, as filmmakers, as storytellers, as artists, you're going to throw yourself into a project, you're going to make it, but then at some point, once it's done, once it's released, I would imagine to a certain degree you have to let it go. But now, with sort of the advent of streaming and all sort of the demand for content out there, how is there a way to sort of describe how rewarding it is that something you made 45 years ago or started making 45 years ago and and quite possibly just sort of put to a shelf and forgotten about and put it aside is now kind of more relevant than ever?
It's great. I mean, first of all, Deborah and I, after that screening in 2018, we also talked about putting it in for the National Film Registry. We said, we had tried once. It was sort of late in the year. We said, all right, look, we'll do it one more time. This is it. We'll try. So we both try to get people to write things in support of the film. And we got these incredible statements. I can't even begin to, unless I showed them to you, from academics, from people who taught film, who used it in their classroom for 30 years, so this, from that. I mean, it was like overwhelming. The people at the National Film Registry, the woman, I don't remember her name.
Stacey Griffith.
Stacey, yeah, she couldn't believe the stuff we were sending in support of the film, which really we really didn't know about. We really hadn't been involved in the film, but the film involved other people, that's for sure. And I think that's why it's incredible for both of us that it's held in high regard, and that people want to see it because it's relevant to their lives, and there's no doubt about it.
Yeah, you just never know in this business. I mean, it is it's extremely gratifying. I don't think, I never would have been able to say 45 years ago that this was good. I think this is obviously the film I'm more known for than any of my others, which is, it's kind of odd. I mean, I like all my films. You interviewed me for the Audrey Flack film.
Yeah.
I think it's a great film, and I hope I don't have to wait 45 years for it to get more recognition. I don't have 45 years, but it came out in the pandemic, which was hard. But
on that note, finally got the news, which is where Deborah and I met in Detroit. Finally got the news is Full Speed Ahead. It was done it came out in 1970, and the distributor can't get it. They're showing it all the time, all over the place.
It's fantastic.
You know that film, David?
I don't, but I'll look it up.
We just have to all live. We have to all live long enough to see our films come
see all the films.
Really.
But I mean, you know what, Deborah, Stewart, I mean, just obviously thank you for the work, and thank you so much for the time today, because I mean, not only is this sort of a significant and sort of important film culturally and historically, but it's just a fascinating piece of cinema on top of all that. And I think I'm so glad this film is getting recognition and more people are getting to see it. And again, thank you both for the time today.
Well, thank you. Lovely. Where are we going to get to see this?
Absolutely. Probably early next week it'll be live. So I'll make sure through the publicists, and you guys you'll get it for sure.
Thanks. All
right. Bye, everybody. And don't forget to visit our friends over at Bay Street Video for all your DVD, Blu-ray rental, or purchasing needs this summer, as they are still open for curbside and some mailing delivery as well. Over at 1172 Bay Street, Toronto, Ontario, Canada. You can give them a call at 416-964-9088. That's 416-964-9088. Or send them an email at baystreetvideoto@gmail.com for any of your DVD and Blu-ray needs.